Let's decode the art of brand creation in our first session called Secrets and Stories Behind Building a Brand. I would like to invite on stage the session moderator, Mr. Arvind Vijay Mohan, to introduce the speaker.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, it's such a pleasure to see you all here, and I'm glad that we are catching this beautiful weather just before it turns. Another week, and we'd probably be turning to toast sitting out here. It is rare for us to be in the company of an individual who's been responsible for steering a legacy brand as legendary as Pucci. And rarer still, to be in the company of someone who has such privileged access to perhaps one of the greatest creative geniuses of our time, Don Emilio Pucci. It's wonderful to have you, Laudomia Pucci, please. Welcome. Why don't you? We can share the mic.
Yes.
Let's
No, it's
worry
good.
about
Hello, everybody. Sorry if I have my glasses on, but with the sun,
It is blinding. It is blinding.
Thank you for the presentation.
Not at all. It's the least that one can say about your father. Now, speaking about Marchi Pucci, the made in Italy revolution that is so celebrated, that is so championed, it would be entirely accurate to say that it was in almost direct part the doing of your father's work. He launched Italy's first ready-to-wear line, and that too, interestingly, focused on sportswear. That to me is fascinating. I mean, there are many things that I find fascinating about the brand, but that in particular. I'd like to understand the backdrop. You know, one would imagine that being a Don who was born into one of the wealthiest Italian families, everything would have come very easily to him. The brand would have just emerged out of nothing. But that wasn't the case. So could you tell us a little about the backdrop and the circumstances in which the brand was created?
Thank you so much for the introduction. And I think what's very interesting when you're talking of heritage brands and founders, I love the idea to put them into context, into the dates they belonged and worked in. Because today we're living in such a fast world and we tend to forget the environment. My father was born in Italy in 1914, so we are talking of 110 years ago. And so he had an incredible life. Some people say he had 4 lives in one. Basically, what I can say that's extraordinary and contributed to what he after became is education in America in the early 30s. That was, of course, unique in those days, certainly if you were Italian. His love for sports. He was in the Olympic ski team in 1936, and that was quite remarkable. And he studied politics. All that to return in Italy in 1937, because it was when Italy was entering the war, unfortunately.
What a time.
And he engaged in aviation. He was a torpedo bomber for the duration of war, and how should I say, he was, at the end of the war, he had many awards as a war hero. Unfortunately, the war was very difficult for all of Italy, and as we know, it came out very, very poor. Thanks to the Marshall Plan, we restarted, and there were quite a few extraordinary individuals who made what Italy is today. One of those was my father. Why do I say that? He was in Switzerland in 1946, recovering from Nazi torture, because that's probably what people do not know, but he underwent Nazi torture. And more dead than alive, he arrived in Switzerland.
Incredible.
And what did he do? Because he didn't have a cent. So you were saying that he came from a very privileged background, but then war destroyed all that. And in order to make a living, he taught Italian and skiing, the 2 things he knew how to do. And so, in order to do that, he did a little suit for himself, inspired by the Italian Air Force, so very lean, very clean, no prints, no colors, it was gray.
This was a ski suit.
A ski suit with a little bit of stretch in the heel,
Right.
and gray wool. And he used to teach skiing. And one of my father's things in life was that he loved women. And basically, one day he was skiing and sees a beautiful American woman up on the slopes that had lost her way. So he accompanied her down, and a few days after, she was wearing his suit. And a photographer by the name of Tony Frisell of Harper's Bazaar came by, took a picture of this beautiful American lady, and the picture ended up on the table of Diana Vreeland, who I would love to know. I would love to know how in 1947 she managed to find my father in Zermatt. That remains a mystery. And she called him up, I don't know how, and said, Emilio, I would like you to draw a ski collection that will be produced in Portland, Oregon, where my father had been in university at White Stag, and distributed at Lord & Taylor's. The answer of my father to Diana was absolutely not. I am an Italian officer of the Italian Air Force. And of course, Diana had it her way, and my father, the summer following, he was designing capri pants in capri.
Incredible, incredible. So one might say, Laudomia, if it weren't for Harper's Bazaar, there's a possibility Pucci might never have been.
I think exactly. I was mentioning that I am so grateful to Harper's Bazaar, not only for today, but for all the history, and of course, for Diana Vreeland and what she did. But I think, it was a moment of incredible opportunities. I think opportunities always exist, and my father was the right person in the right time to come up with what Italy has become, really, a land of ready-to-wear, of made in Italy, and he was one of the founders of all that. Indeed. And what's interesting in a way, as you mentioned, his first boutique was Emilio Original Sportswear.
Right.
And we are talking of the year of 1947, and his boutique was 1950, but Dior did the new look, and he was doing ski suits.
Right.
So, that sounds so normal today to talk about sportswear and everything, but in those days, women weren't used to that.
Indeed. I'd like to speak about glamour. You spoke of his love for the ladies. When I think glamour, I instantly think of Pucci. Images of the legendary photographer Slim Aarons, for instance, those lusciously languorous poolside pictures in Capri or Saint-Tropez, or those beautiful destinations along the French Riviera, and I'm instantly thinking Pucci. And then, of course, the bevy of beauties that he was always surrounded by, Marilyn Monroe, Lauren Bacall, Elizabeth Taylor, Sophia Loren. Tell us about why you feel the brand became so popular so rapidly.
For two reasons, I think. It's a very good question. Basically, he had in his office, a writing that in the old days he always used to present to me. And he said, I work for servicing women. I got my job thanks to a woman, and I will always service women and make them look more beautiful. And I thought that was a lovely way of saying. So, it was about service and making women more beautiful. And I think women, were attracted to that. And I always remember the pride he took in talking of how Marilyn Monroe started wearing his clothes. Let me go back a step. Mm-hmm. When you think of Pucci, you think of prints and colors.
Right.
But not everybody knows that he innovated fabrics tremendously. And the most important fabric probably for him was the silk jersey, right, that he developed from the silk stockings of women. And the reason for that was that it could move with your body. And as he came from the sports and the sportswear, he wanted the body to move. Now today it sounds very normal to have stretch, but in those days it wasn't. And for him, the body was the inspiration, the movement, etc. And the color was an embellishment. So the silk jersey, when he developed it, and he went to Como and had special threads done, etc., and he liked the idea that it was not weighing, and you could have dresses of 100 and 150 grams, put them in little bags, put them in your suitcase, travel light, all things that we love doing today. Now, when he brought it to America, Americans said, Emilio, no woman is going to wear that. And he said, that's interesting. And funnily enough, he sold it to a store in Los Angeles, and apparently Marilyn Monroe walked into the store, bought the dress, took off her bra, and that was the beginning of the big love affair between Marilyn Monroe and my father's clothes. So, and the interesting thing, actually, you probably remember there was a sale of Marilyn Monroe's clothes at Christie's in 2001. And the only chapter dedicated to a designer was, of course, Pucci.
That's right.
And we bought back some pieces.
Oh,
and what's very interesting, you really realize that Marilyn Monroe was tiny. Her proportions were incredible. Her shoulders, her waistline, everything, tiny, tiny, you would have not expected. So that's really very amusing. And I've got also the bottom of a bikini.
Oh,
so it's quite...
That's memorabilia to keep.
Yes.
You know, we speak of Miss Monroe. It's interesting, and I may be wrong here, but I understand she was wearing Pucci when she seduced Arthur Miller.
Absolutely.
There we
Thank
go.
you for saying
so
it.
piece
Yes.
of history right there.
Well, I think it was the silk jersey. Moving on.
Right,
Yes.
wonderful, wonderful. The creative process, Laudomia. You know, how do you attribute the creative process coming through? Do you have memories of conversations with your father of how that swirl, you know, that riot of color, how did that emerge?
As we said earlier, he started with solids and fabrics and development. And then at some point, I've never understood how much he was an artist and how much he was, what he said, an artisan more than a designer. But he was inspired by what he saw.
Right.
And he had a tremendous love for his city of Florence. He had tremendous love for Italian culture. So he was inspired by the Palio of Siena, that's a horse race. He was inspired by Monreale in Sicily. And he would take these motifs and start working with them. And then Stanley Marcus said, Emilio, of your scarves, you should do collections. And that's the beginning of the end, in the sense that it started being colors all over the place and prints. He was inspired by different countries. He was inspired by Bali. He was inspired by Africa. He was inspired by the world around him, and he traveled, and he just absorbed everything. Now, he designed all the time, and then it was always designed by hand. And then he had, his alphabet was colors.
Right.
And that alphabet was inspired by Italian colors. I mean, you can always recognize in India Indian colors.
Indeed.
And when you look at the palette of my father, you know that you're in the Mediterranean. It's those warm fuchsias and turquoises, etc. And he was inspired by the depth of water of Capri, the bougainvilleas, etc. And that is really a language of his own, and he developed those colors. It took kind of 2 years to develop a geranium color. And it's all inspired by nature. And he was very, very strict about that. And you could only do it that way. And I think he has a language that he developed on his own.
That's wonderful. You know, what to me is fascinating is a Pucci print is as relevant today as it was 60, 70 years back when it was designed. And that really speaks to the timelessness of his creations. I'd like to talk about a very, very key facet. You know, despite being so exclusive, so reticent almost, away from the limelight, I can't think of any other designer whose work has impacted every designer I can think of, from Versace to Tom Ford. Can you speak to that?
Well, that's an extraordinary compliment, and I think he'd be very happy. In the sense that what I think, the timeless of the prints, or what I always say, is his inspiration coming from Italian art, Italian, you know, old masters, etc. For him, art remained with the old masters, probably, and the Renaissance was the most modern he could relate to. After, he was not really interested. Basically, as I said, he was taking inspiration by that, and he always said that in Florence and in the Palazzo, you could only create beautiful things. And I think in that he was an artist, where art sometimes has a durability. It's not season, you know, it's not a seasonally thing. And that's, you know, why it permeates, and it has that kind of impact. Now, in terms of, you know, starting over, what is it, 70 years ago, 80 years ago, he has made an impact on fashion, and he was very happy. I remember when he noticed that, for example, the sports was picking up on color, he said, maybe I've done something right in life. I opened to a language that others could speak too. And I think that's, only somebody very, very big in what he says can see the evolution in other fields and be happy of it. So for him, he was really happy that other people were taking that kind of inspiration.
Well, it speaks to his vision, the fact that he has such a sweeping vision of what he wanted to create. It also, I think, is of relevance to say that he comes from Florence, the seat of the Renaissance. So in very many ways, he created a cultural renaissance in the fashion arena that will live on forever. From exclusivity, I want to speak about the converse, which is inclusivity. Laudomia, here's a man who several decades ago really, was speaking of topics that are considered buzzwords today, inclusivity being one of them. There were ladies of color, for instance, who he gave an opportunity to. He empowered women in so many ways. He was constantly collaborating. There were so many enterprises. There was perfume. There was constant innovation by way of this material that he created called Emilio Form. Talk to us about that.
Well, that really brings me in also what I'm trying to do today, and we'll talk about it later. But I think besides the collections, besides the fashion, besides the colors, besides the prints, besides everything you can see that is already very powerful, he stood for values. And I think today, heritage brands have a mission. And as I'm working today on the archives, I've left the corporate life and I'm taking more care of the cultural aspect. I like to underline this aspect of values. What are the values? As I said, he empowered women, as you were saying very rightly, wanted them to have a modern, contemporary life, move, have sports, work, just like men. And that was unheard of in those days. Then, of course, fabric research, innovation, technology. I often wonder what would he be doing today when so much can be invented and created. He'd love it. Probably he'd be doing something, again, incredible. The fact that he was the first designer to present in a fashion show colored women, and that today is something that I like to repeat again and again. And I was in a conference in South Africa just before COVID, presenting that because very few people knew. And the interesting thing is that when I was growing up as a little child, I would always see in the house women from Asia, women from, Europe, and colored women. Oh. And the whole thing I thought was so wonderful and so normal, but then I realized it wasn't, and that was opening to a global world and to global ethnicities. And he thought it was just wonderful because it was inspiring and the way they moved and their bodies. And today I'm speaking to these ladies who worked for my father in Florence, in the showroom and in the fitting rooms. And they're all so thankful. There's an extraordinary Japanese lady who I see often, and another lady who lives in America. So, there is a legacy also of what these women tell me of what my father did for them. And it's extraordinary.
Well, with the benefit of retrospective reading, he clearly was well ahead of his time. I think that can be said without any hesitation. Laudomia, I'd like to now come to you taking charge. You were frightfully young. You were in your early 20s, and you're taking the baton from this legend. So talk to us about the responsibility and how you managed to see the continuity through at that young age.
Well, I consider myself very lucky, of course. And as I said, growing up, what I thought was normal was actually not normal at all. Seeing fashion shows, models on the roofs, your father running around the place, colors all over. So actually, I hated fashion, and I wanted to go into politics, as I told you yesterday, and I'd just be somebody very different. I didn't have that opportunity. My father was about 47 years older than me. So being Italian, we thought that family business was something we had to take care and somebody had to do it. So he had decided it was me. I tried to say no, but didn't work. So I was kind of his first assistant. It was those men who created brands, founders who you would never say no to. They just had their vision and their way of doing things. And I learned from him everything. From packing a suitcase, traveling, doing a fashion show, selling to buyers, doing the colors, doing the fittings. He was extraordinary in energy. And I was exhausted when I was traveling with him, and he was eating a yogurt and feeling fine. So I was 23 and he was 70. Anyhow, I worked with him for a couple of years, and then I went to learn in France at Hubert de Givenchy, who turned out to be my second father, just as demanding and just as wonderful. And then I returned to Florence, and my father's health, unfortunately, failed him. And at 28, I was running the brand. So I had learned the ropes very quickly, let's say, but I realized, having worked for two giants, that I was not a creative talent. And my mission was a mission to carry the brand forward. And I finally have this kind of mind that I can understand creativity, but I do understand business. And that allowed me to carry the brand along for about 10 years on my own, single-handedly, where I was doing everything, just because I was used to doing everything. So I was designing, I was creating. And it's thanks to the industry, to buyers, to department stores, to magazines. I had a very, very good relation with an industry that wasn't as big as today. You had extraordinary relations with the people who would tell you, why don't you do this, help me with that. And I would just, instinctively follow and learn in the steps. So I had big shoes to fill, but I had fantastic people around me to help me. And then one day, I just realized that the world was changing. It was becoming much more competitive, much more business-oriented. And I needed a good supply chain, and I needed good people. And that's when LVMH came along and knocked on the door. And a wonderful man called Yves Carcel, just presented me with a vision of rolling out stores and rolling out product. And that was irresistible. And that was my career with LVMH. It lasted 21 years. And I retired 2 years ago to take care of the heritage, my life, and tell the story.
And that brings us to the Palazzo. I can't think of a greater, better preserved archive than the one that you're maintaining in Florence. So could you tell us about that?
Well, you have to come and see it first.
Indeed. This summer.
Yes, absolutely. But what I think is, I've been very lucky because having this rather large palazzo in Florence, and my father, who was creating all these collections, we kept a lot in the house. So a lot has never left. We are not like other companies or whatever that bought back archives. As you know, Gucci has an amazing archive, but they bought it back. We has never left. And I do buy bits and pieces, but it's immaculate pieces that never left. So there's been a tremendous pressure, in a way, to catalog it, understand what we have, be inspired with it, present it to designers who can interpret it, and that is continuing today. We have an agreement with the company. They come in, study it, and that pleases me. I think it's important to keep the message alive. And how do I do it? I've opened 2 floors of the Palazzo, first of all to a school, because I believe in youth and I believe in talent, and I think they are the ones who can interpret the future of fashion and the values in the right manner. So I have this school that's called IED, Istituto Europeo di Design, who has 5 laboratories where they have, draping and sewing machines, exactly as the Palazzo was when I was growing up. So I've been true to that.
A return to innocence.
And for the rest, I've just, covered a Renaissance palazzo in turquoise and fuchsia colors. I've been inspired by the artists that have worked there, and I have a contemporary art today there by Chihuly, who is this wonderful sculptor of glass.
Incredible artist.
I have contemporary design and furniture and Pucci design and Pucci rugs. And then I've got some setups curated. And so we tell the story of a family that has lived there, that built the space, and of art and artisans. That is really what Florence is about and what I think fashion is about. Here we are in a country where manufacturing, crafts are so important. And I try and preserve that and talk about that. So it's more the cultural experience, you know. And here we're talking of luxury experience. And I try to give in a city where you have a lot of tourism, a different experience that you can't buy something, you just have to experience it.
Indeed. And as I understand, anyone who wishes to experience the Palazzo
Has to come and see us.
So
exactly.
there we
And
go
it's
this
not
summer.
open to the public. It's very, very private. It's just because it's such a labor of love. And I'm very pleased with what I'm doing. And, you know, it's a different way. And I think no fashion house has really done this in this way. And I've studied it after COVID because I just said, now, where do we take this? You know, I have this space, I have this archive. And so I hope you can all come and see us. And you, first of all.
Indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, summer plans are made.
Yeah. I think we have a little video that you can maybe send, and you'll see what the premises are about. And please, any comment is more than welcome.
That looks spectacular, Laudomia. And
Well, it's different.
it
It's
is. It is. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope this has been an insightful conversation. It's been a delight to speak to you, Laudomia. Thank you so much for being with us.
Arvind, before you close, can I ask a last question?
Of course.
Sorry, ma'am, we have you on stage.
Thank you.
You know, running a family business is a luxury. Me and Savitri here both are part of our family businesses. She's third generation, I'm second generation. Sorry, Savitri, for bringing you into this question. But any advice from somebody who's done it, lived it? What should we be looking at? What are the pros? What are the cons? Any advice?
Never compare to the ones who came before. Learn, listen, and do it your way, to what you are, really, because that you can't get wrong, A. B, imagine that somebody will come after you. Don't make a wait for those who have to come after you. So understand timing and understand how the business will develop and make the right choices as a business, not as your baby. That's a different way of looking at it. Children come from you but run away, and businesses too.
Thank you very much.